I'm Belinda Goodrich.
And I'm Brandy Bean. Welcome to
See How I Did That? This is your opportunity to get engaged and inspired by our guests who have overcome obstacles to achieve success.
Real women,
Real talk,
and real inspiration. Your transformation starts now.
I'm Belinda Goodrich.
And I'm Brandy Bean.
And this is See How I Did That? On today's episode, we had the awesome opportunity to talk with Lauren Schieffer, and she gave us some pretty powerful information during this interview.
I would say she gave us some very powerful kernels of information.
Ooh, kernels of wisdom. I see what you did there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we do want to give you a warning before listening to this episode that there is a trigger warning associated with it, because we do talk about assault and the Me Too movement, so just be aware of that. But Lauren gives us some really great insight and really how it has transformed her life and what she's now doing to help others.
Absolutely. And she comes from such a raw place, especially when she talks about her past and what she put into those books that she wrote. I mean, it's an amazing interview, and she just gets so personal and raw with us. I can't thank her enough.
Yeah, Lauren's a great person. She's a great friend, and we were so happy to have her on this podcast. Enjoy this episode with Lauren Schieffer.
Welcome to See How I Did That. I'm Brandy Bean.
And I'm Belinda Goodrich.
And today we are talking with Lauren Schieffer, and I am so excited for this interview. I don't know about you.
Yeah, Lauren, we're so pleased to have you on here on our podcast. We've known each other now for quite a few years. And one thing that struck me immediately when I met you was just your strength. Your strength and your compassion just comes through, and your ability to relate to people around you. So I was instantly drawn to you as a peer, as a friend, as a woman. So let's start off. Lauren, why don't you tell us about yourself, a little bit about your journey, so our listeners know your background.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited. I am Lauren Schieffer. I am the Colonel's daughter, and I was raised in an Air Force household. My father was Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force, put 36 years in, and that military children live their lives like chips on a stream. We go where the military tells us to go, when they tell us to go, sometimes with 2 weeks notice to pack up and ship out. And we do so with a brave little soldier face on. And that life taught me some resilience and some perseverance, and gave me many of the skills that I have now in communicating with different people, because every new station required that I got to know a new city, a new school, a new neighborhood, and I had to fit in. So it gave me a great resilience.
Yeah.
In my corporate career, I bounced around multiple industries until I landed in the one that is my passion and that I believe God created me to do, and that is speaking professionally.
Awesome. And I can imagine you're just such a gift, like I say, to your audience, is because you are genuine. And I think that was like you say, that's the thing that strikes me so much when we talk with you and everything, is that being genuine, and you can see where that resiliency came from with moving around. So, I know quite a bit about you, and I'm struck by your strength. And we were having a conversation recently, and I'd like to go into your history, so to speak, on assault, and within safe boundaries of what you feel comfortable sharing with us and sharing with our listeners.
So adversity.
Mm-hmm.
And let me start with a blanket statement. And that is, I believe profoundly that what happens to you in your life is not as important as how you choose to respond to what happens to you in your life.
Agreed. Yep.
And so I am a recovering bulimic. I have an eating disorder. It's called bulimia nervosa. I've been in sustained recovery for 34 years. Hooray for me. Yay.
Wow, congratulations. That is amazing.
Thank you. And that was a result of trying to control the only thing that I could control in my life, and that is what came into and out of my mouth, when and how that happened. In addition to that, I am the survivor of 1 attempted and 2 full-on sexual assaults. So I am the rare spot on the planet that lightning does indeed strike twice.
Right.
And what we were discussing in this conversation that we had is how I chose to respond to that.
Right.
And I would like you and your listeners to visualize the word hero written straight up and down like an anagram.
Yeah.
So the first letter is H, that's the happening.
Mm-hmm.
The last letter is O, that's the outcome.
Okay.
Now, most people believe that the happening determines the outcome, and that is a fallacy. If you allow the happening to determine the outcome, you are reacting. See, the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is visceral, it's emotional, it's knee-jerk.
Yeah. Right.
Response requires thought. So happening does not determine the outcome. You're missing 2 pieces there. Mm-hmm. So when anyone suffers the indignity of an assault, it's pretty normal and natural to believe that it was my fault.
Right.
I should have, I shouldn't have. I should have, I shouldn't have. And you can shouldn't yourself into a corner sucking your thumb. It took time and effort, people who love me, patience, a lot of therapy, to convince myself that it wasn't my fault. Indeed, because it was a stranger, it had nothing whatsoever to do with me. I was merely the object of a perpetrator's criminal behavior.
Sure.
When it happens to someone a second or a third time, it's a whole lot harder to convince yourself that it wasn't your fault.
Right, right.
You kind of feel like there's a target on your back, or any other part of your body you choose to choose.
Right.
That took more time and more effort. And I came to the same conclusion. It wasn't about me. It wasn't my fault.
Right.
That's the evaluation. That's the E in that anagram, the evaluation. And the evaluation is that it wasn't my fault. It had nothing to do with me. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or at the right time, whatever.
Right.
The R in that equation is reaction or response. And had I chosen to react, I really would have curled up in a corner of my couch, covered myself with a blanket, sucked my thumb, and never come out of the house again.
Sure.
Instead, I chose to respond. And the response that I chose is that those perpetrators receive no more of my life than the 20 minutes between the 2 of them that they stole.
Yeah.
That's all they get, ever.
Yeah.
So the happening combined with the evaluation created the response. And the response determines the outcome. And that outcome is that I now have the emotional muscle to stand in front of thousands of people globally and speak from experience and tell them that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train.
You know,
I'm pretty sure that's not the outcome that the perpetrator intended.
Right, right.
That's the outcome that I chose based on my evaluation and my response. So that's my hero anagram.
No, I love that. And I think there's a few things you said in there. First thing it immediately brought to mind, of course, is Viktor Frankl. And, you know, and my favorite quote of his that I use a lot is, you know, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And it's in that space that we choose how we are going to respond to that stimulus. That space is our power. Yeah. And that's exactly what you've laid out with your hero anagram of that evaluation to response versus the reaction. And I love that. Couple of other things to pull out too. You mentioned, you know, I'm the lucky one, like lightning did strike twice, right? I wonder, and this is just kind of putting this out as a kind of a universal question, but I have to wonder how many other women are out there that have been victimized multiple times, because to me, it does not seem like in conversations that I've had, and then in my own personal experience, it wasn't once, sometimes it wasn't twice, sometimes it is multiple times, different perpetrators. So I think it's a little bit more of an epidemic, or had been more of an epidemic. Hopefully we're starting to change that tide. I don't know. That it does happen. And I think that's an important message to get out to people if they have been in that situation more than once. I think that you're right. That first reframe is a little bit easier to say, okay, it wasn't my fault. But when they've got it happening multiple times, now it's like, okay, wait a minute, this is a trend. So I must be the one there. So that's a really powerful message to give to our listeners on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I know personally multiple people that were in that same boat, and I can tell you that they did not handle it as eloquently as you did. Nothing against them, but I think it takes a very special mindset to do so. And I think having examples in life is huge, and you are setting the example. So kudos to you, because now I know that some of my friends will listen to this who have been in that situation, and to hear somebody say, it was not you, do not give them any more of your life than they already took. And I think that's so powerful.
Brandy, I want to be really, really honest and transparent and say that it was not gracious or eloquent to begin with.
Sure.
But it is now.
We're looking at decades ago that I've had time to work on this.
Right.
There was a turning point. There was a moment. Frankly, I was on the telephone in the shower because I had been in the shower pretty consistently for 24 hours. And I called my father, the colonel, who was furious with me for not having called the police. But if I'd called the police, they would have asked me questions I couldn't answer. Like, why was I out at 2:00 in the morning in nothing but dance clothes from a dance rehearsal when my car broke down? Why did I let my car break down? Why did I not get a license plate number? Why could I not describe the man? What did I expect them to do when I couldn't give them anything to go on? These were all, so I didn't call the police. I called my father. And he was, bless his heart, he was wholly ill-equipped to deal with the emotional wreckage from 500 miles away.
Sure.
And so what my dad said was, sometimes we've got to walk through fire, kid. You have had to deal with more than anyone should have to. Prove you're bigger than all of it.
Wow.
And that actually, that's one of the quotes that's in the new book that's coming out in June. But that was the moment that I decided to stop reacting and start responding. So that was decades ago. So it wasn't pretty to start with. I don't want anybody to think that, I walked away and said, oh, I'm bigger than this. Because that wasn't it, nobody should expect that of themselves.
Absolutely.
So what advice would you give we know that there are people out there that didn't deal with it. Maybe something did happen decades ago, maybe years ago, whatever, and they haven't dealt with it and they're still holding on to that piece. What advice would you give them?
I honestly don't think that I would have been anywhere near where I am without really good therapy. And if I can give you one more visual that helped me a lot. We were talking about this keynote that I do to specific audiences that includes that story. And the keynote is called Out of the Cesspool. And that title comes from a moment in therapy when my therapist said, Lauren, I want you to visualize this with me. You are standing in the middle of a cesspool surrounded by human waste. And you're standing very, very still because if you move, it roils up the yuck around you and it smells horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're very still, everything settles down. It doesn't smell as bad. So you've been very, very still for 10 years. 3 steps in any direction are going to take you out of that cesspool. They're going to be the hardest, most difficult, most horrible steps you've ever taken in your life. But once you've done that, you can take a shower and wash that crap off of you for the rest of your life and take charge of your own life. So the choice is yours. Are you going to stand still for another 10 years? Or are you going to do the work that's necessary to move on?
Wow.
I think that's powerful. And honestly, that's a great imagery for really anybody who's going through really anything, depression, suicidal thoughts, whatever that may be. I mean, standing still, you can't go anywhere if you're standing still.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's a great image that, paints a great picture.
And, we've all got stuff. Nobody gets through life without adversity. We've all got stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Some have more stuff than others, but we've all got stuff.
Right.
So it relates to anyone with stuff.
Right.
Absolutely.
How do you think the Me Too movement has helped and or hurt victims in these situations?
I think it's helped us in giving a voice where we didn't have a voice before. And when you don't have a voice, it's easier to absorb the shame.
Mm-hmm.
And to verbalize the fact that it doesn't matter what I was wearing. It doesn't matter men can't help themselves. Yes, they can. So I think that's helped us a lot. I think that in industries that are naturally gregarious, like ours, we're professional speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Professional speakers are huggers.
Mm-hmm.
Creating a world where we're not sure if we can hug each other.
Right.
I think the pendulum is going to have to swing. I talk to a lot of men that are afraid. They're just afraid of saying the wrong thing that might be taken incorrectly.
Right.
Whether they intended it or not. It's a pendulum swing, and maybe it hasn't swung as far as it needs to or is going to, but
Right.
hopefully we will find a happy medium where we can be gregarious, affectionate, competent individuals, whether we're a man or a woman, and not worry about whether we're going to dog each other.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. Yeah, and I know I've talked with men as well, and and they're freaked out. They're like, I don't even know what to do anymore. Like, peers that I used to go up, like you say, as I know national speakers, we do that. We're huggers. We're like, hey, it is, and then it kind of puts us women too in kind of a weird spot, because it's like, okay, well, I don't want to make them any more uncomfortable, and so there is that weird thing. And I agree, it is a pendulum. I think it does give a voice. I remember a conversation actually with someone, and was kind of making light of the Me Too. It was a gentleman making light of the Me Too movement, and that's silly and people are overreacting. And it took me a minute, and this is someone I was very close to. It took me a minute, and I said, you know what? Actually, no, I could actually say Me Too. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I shared with him. I'm like, here's what I experienced in corporate environments. And it didn't happen once. It didn't happen twice. It happened multiple times. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I had no idea. And I said, well, we don't walk around with a great big tattoo on our forehead saying, hey, this happened to me, that, I was also assaulted or whatever. And I said, so, let's be careful with, saying people are crying wolf here, Uh-huh. I think we are starting to give a voice to things. And I think, even I look back at my parents' marriage early on, and, men were allowed to treat their wives very differently than they are today, and it was just assumed that was okay.
Well, and to have someone say, well, it was a different time. And that is true. It was a different time. It doesn't justify it.
Exactly.
And it doesn't mean that that's okay now.
Right.
You know, when this country was founded on the backs of slaves, well, it was a different time. That doesn't mean that change doesn't need to happen.
Right.
You know, so I agree with that. Another thing that I think is a benefit that just came to mind is that I think this is solidifying for us just how very strong we are.
Yeah.
Because when I included that story in my very first book, my sister-in-law read the book. I think maybe she felt obligated. But my sister-in-law read my book, and she said to my husband, I had no idea that had happened to Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
And Ron said, well, that's because she doesn't talk about it. It's not part of her life now. It made her stronger. She's grown. She's taken the lessons, and now she offers those lessons to other people, but it's not something that she wears like a badge of honor or talks about. And when we can look each other in the eye and say, me too, and know that we are stronger because of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's fire we don't want to walk through again.
Right.
But we are stronger because of it. And I think that acknowledging that for each other, I think is important also.
Yeah, I agree.
How would you say that social media has helped or hurt the Me Too movement and making people more aware?
Ask me that again. I missed it, Brandy.
No, you're good. How do you feel that social media has helped or hurt the Me Too movement?
Social media is a double-edged sword, is it not?
Agreed. Absolutely.
I think initially it helped. It gave voice. Certainly, I know in our industry and in the social groups that you and I belong to for our association, the ability to say, "Oh my gosh, I'm not alone.
Right.
I'm not the only one that this happened to." I think that was beneficial. The challenge that I'm seeing with social media now is, as with politics, as with news, you can never be sure that what you're reading is truth. Yes. Now, I'm not saying that I'm reading someone's post where they're bearing their soul about what's happening to them and question whether or not they're telling the truth. Okay. I'm saying that it is too easy now to manipulate words to mean what was not intended.
That's true.
And I think that is happening in the Me Too movement. And I don't have a specific example. I'm not being specific, but I think that is happening or has the potential to happen, to twist things for the benefit of women's empowerment or against women's empowerment, whichever you choose, just like you can twist things for the right or for the left in politics right now. And you just can't trust anything on social media.
Yeah. Right. Agree. No,
Except me. I will always tell you the truth.
Me too. Right? Yeah, we tend to be pretty transparent ourselves. Yeah. You know, obviously want to stick to the highest of integrity and everything. You know, I love what you said about it. It has made us stronger. I think the idea of the choosing the response, being the overcomer, I think that helps other women who maybe still are dealing with some things recognize that there is that light on the other side, that you can move beyond this, and you can pull the strength from it. You know, it is how we respond.
And sometimes it feels so big and so icky that you're not quite sure how you're possibly going to get it out of you.
Yeah.
And you know, I have to tell you that I cleared a room and took a baseball bat to a beanbag chair, and I beat it till all of the seams split and all the stuffing came out of it. And afterward, I was physically sick to my stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the visual that I just threw it up. I let it go. I threw it up and got rid of it. But it doesn't have to be that dramatic. You can write it down on a piece of paper and burn it to ash.
Yes.
Or you could, one of my favorite things to do is when something's bothering me. Now, we have a compost pile. Farmer Ron, my husband, we have a compost pile. And when something's bothering me, I like to write it down on a piece of paper, and I will shove that piece of paper in the middle of the compost pile, because then it decomposes and becomes something positive.
I like that.
And loam, good earth loam. So.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. No, the idea of burning, writing down things, burning them up, to me, that's always that's something I certainly appreciate and embrace. There's certain things of it, and I'm a big fan of writing anyway. I think it's so therapeutic, pen to paper, pencil to paper, so therapeutic to work through things. And I strongly encourage that for our listeners. If you're working through something, sometimes just putting that down and then destroying it after. I love the idea of putting it in the compost. That's even better than my normal is I'm going to light the sucker on fire and get rid of that. Yeah, so that's
fascinating.
Yeah, so I know we're going to take a turn here off of the topic we have been on, but that's okay, because I want to, so let's bring up your book. So you have Kernels of Wisdom, which I love the play on words there.
Thank you.
A Daughter's Reflection on Leadership, which is volume 1, and then A Daughter's Reflection on Significance, which is volume 2. Tell us a little bit about that and how those books came to be and who your audience would be for these.
So when my father passed, I would hear his voice in the back of my head, because he was formidable in raising me. And for a while, I focused on the fact that I was never going to hear that voice again. And as a means of working through my grief, I started writing it down, and I called them kernelisms. And anytime a quote from Dad came into my head, I go, oh, kernelism, and I'd write it down. And I saved them in a Word document, thinking that I would just, hand them to my children as a way of remembering their Grandpa Ho-Ho. And then a colleague of mine said in passing, I never had a chance to meet your father, but he sounds like he was a really amazing man. I'd love to read your kernelisms at some point. Okay. And someone else said that to me in the same week. That's when I was like, oh, I get it. And so as I went through them, they naturally settled into 3 categories. Kernels of Wisdom will be a 3-volume set.
Okay.
The first one, which came out last year, is A Daughter's Reflection on Leadership. The second one, which is in post-production and will come out June 1st, is A Daughter's Reflection on Significance. And the third one will be on accountability and self-discipline. And each of them will be laid out the same way. So it'll be an easy transition from one book to the next. And so on one side of the page, I have my dad's quote. And then on the next page or a couple of pages, I flesh that out. What was the moment of that quote, or what brought it to mind? What did it mean to me? What might it mean to you and your business?
Okay.
Each book has 52 quotes, so that you can, if you choose, take a book and use it as a study for a year, once a week.
That's a great format.
Thanks.
Really good as well. I cannot wait to read them.
Yeah, we will do that. And I am on your site, so we can pre-order now.
Yeah.
Yes, you can. You can pre-order Significance now.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we'll purchase Daughter's Reflection on Leadership today.
Oh, thank you so much.
I think that's great. I love the layout. And I think bringing in the voices of the past are so important. Some of those key lessons. And I know you and I have been kind of on a similar path. And, I lost my parents too over the past 18 months. And those little things, we call them Mimi-isms from my mother, but yes, those probably will not be in a book. It could be kind of a funny book. It might be my first humorous book, but I think being able to not only for us to have that as a legacy But be able to share that, I think it's so, so important. So I applaud you for doing that. I love the idea of the 3 books. And I love the idea of the layout being 52 and just knowing each day, just kind of turn the page and kind of, each week you just turn the page and see, okay, this week I can kind of study on this or digest that. So very, very impressive.
And if there are any of your listeners that are leaders, and leadership is a choice, it's not a position. For the leadership book, there is also a study guide available, and it has, each of the quotes has 4 contemplation questions that you can use to I don't know if I'll do that with significance because it's a little touchy-feelier than, that's a technical term, touchy-feelier.
Yeah, touchy-feelier. Yeah.
Leadership is great for corporations and leaders, and that's why I started with that one. Significance is a little warmer and fuzzier. I don't know if I'll do a study guide for that. I probably will, but it's not going to come out at the same time that the book did. But there's a study guide available with leadership.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, we will make sure that we post the links in the podcast so that people can find your book out there and learn more about you. Lauren, you have been an absolute joy. I want to applaud you for sharing your heart so transparently with us and with our listeners. I think we need to have these kind of conversations. I think this is what changes the world. And I think this is what does also impact that pendulum swing.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was my privilege.
All right. Lauren. Thank you, Lauren.
Brandy, what did you think of that interview with Lauren?
I thought it was amazing, to be honest. Everything that she talked about from the Me Too movement to her books, it really resonated with me. And I mean, I'm just so in awe of her, perseverance and resilience of she's making the world a better place.
She definitely is, and definitely check her out on her website. She is a phenomenal author, a keynote speaker, a consultant, and she just brings a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom, and we are so happy that she shared that with us. Again, remember, we are sponsored by Goodrich Publishing, so check us out on the web at www.goodrichpublishing.com. And stay tuned for more incredible episodes with our guests on See How I Did That?